Hey there, this is Austin here from the I-Ching and I-Ching Academy here based in Santa Monica, California. How are you guys doing today? So just a real quick recap of Dr. Wu's class from the previous week. He talked about how during this time in the summer, the insects are the most active. It's kind of the beginning of the hot season. The hot season kind of peaks more towards August, but this is kind of the beginning of when, nature-wise, seasonally-wise, things start to, really precipitously increase in temperature. And so as a result, the insects are more active during this time. And he talked about during the ancient times, they would use a combination of different herbs to repel those insects. So they would get these 4 different herbs, which I'll go into in a further video, and they would kind of ground them up a little bit, and then they would put them in a sack of some kind, and then they would either carry that sack around with them so that they didn't get bit, or they would also put them by their bed or on their door of their bedroom, things like that. It's basically just, it's kind of like a good omen or a talisman for this season. So that's something that you can practice and something that I'll go into further in a different video. So the main insects that they would try and repel during this time were the spider, the snake, the centipede, the scorpion, and the frog. Now, they originally, in some theologies, they also include the lizard, but in Taoism, they basically believe that the lizard is like a mini dragon, so they did not include it on the list. And the only, they basically consider the lizard's urine as toxic. But the other animals, as you know, do have, poison that, accompanies them, and so they were trying to repel those during this season. Another thing they would do is they would use this Huang Chua wine, and so it's actually a type of poison. So it's not legally regulated here in the United States, but in China they use it medicinally for certain things. But if you do give it, if it ends up in your food somehow, etc., you would be poisoned by it. But this type of wine, what they would do is they would place it kind of around the corners of their room, different places to kind of just repel insects, repel different types of spirits, etc. But in essence, he was basically saying that animals or insects can smell this, not just smell, but also sense it from many, a long distance away, basically. And he talked about sensing it not as just a sense of smell, but on a different level. Animals can perceive certain things as like colors, or certain things as kind of like different visual imagery in their minds, and so they were able to detect this from long distances away, and that's part of the reason they would use the wine and this specific kind of herb subset during this time. He also talked about how in the ancient times, like, what did they do for the monasteries, and so he said a lot of the ancient monasteries, none of them have termite problems. And a lot of that's because when they were building it, they would treat the wood in this type of herbal lather, if you will. So they would treat the wood with these different types of herbs. And so those herbs would actually naturally repel the termites. And so that's why a lot of them are still standing to this day, is because they were built using these ancient types of techniques. He also went into what's called the yuen technique. And the yuen technique, like, kind of, to put it simply, is kind of like a pulling or pushing effect. So it's almost like if you rub on your skin and you're like trying to pull it up and down as you rub. It's like a vigorous rub where you're like almost trying to separate the skin from the muscle. That is the yuen technique. And so what you're trying to do is get into the subcutaneous parts of the arm and parts of different layers of the skin to kind of like gyrate whatever's there out of that area. And so he talks about this principle being used in many areas, from anything from foot massage to when you wax your car. There's kind of a similar, or when you just even clean your car, you're just trying to kind of rub it out. You're trying to rub whatever's there that shouldn't be there kind of out of the skin, or out of the metal, etc., etc. So there's many different ways. He even said when you put on a shirt and you're trying to straighten the shirt, kind of get get it positioned the right way. That's kind of like a way to describe the yuan technique. He also went into how, out of all the sounds, like the most healing sound for humans usually is their mother's voice. Like the mother's voice, if you just think about that, is one of the most healing sounds that there is. And how when your mom cradles you, that's kind of your first form of training. And when she's talking to you, that she's your first teacher, which you could say is obvious, but sometimes they're not actually verbally saying anything, just merely comforting you, but their voice is a form of teaching for you. And the same principle applies when you pet the back of a dog. You kind of have that same comforting feeling that you would have with a mother kind of comforting their infant, etc. And he also talked about how when we're cooking, we don't recognize what the 5 poisonous herbs are, but I'm just gonna look here quick. Basically, they're ginger, garlic, cilantro, onions, and the Szechuan hot peppers. They're the kind of peppers that make your mouth go numb. Those are the peppers if you've ever had them at an Asian restaurant. So those are actually forms of poison, but of course we use them in everyday cooking. It's just to what degree do you use them, and in large quantities they can be poisonous, to human beings. So he just talked about, there's a reason for everything. There's a reason for the 5 poisonous insects. There's a reason for the 5 poisonous herbs. It's all kind of how it's counterbalanced. There's many anecdotal stories throughout history of snake venom being used in different medicinal concoctions and tinctures. I think even in the modern day, there've been modern Western medicines that they've analyzed and kind of used bits and pieces of those kind of like molecular structures of those poisons in certain types of modern antibiotics, therapies of some kind. So everything has a purpose and a use case. Nothing in nature has no purpose. So in essence, it's just important to realize the counterbalance, how these go back to the 5 elements that we talked about in previous videos, and how everything kind of has a way to kind of like keep itself in check in terms of nature. But the wine that he was talking about for the poisonous wine, they would actually use it for certain types of skin conditions. So they would put a tiny bit of that in, like if you had like bad itching for elderly people, or certain types of rashes or certain types of skin conditions, they would use that, and it would immediately clear up the itching. But there is a less poisonous version that they would use more on the day-to-day basis, because being that it's less poisonous, it's less hazardous to use, and kind of used for more everyday things, if that makes sense. So, but that was it for this week. Thank you guys so much for coming out and tuning in. I really appreciate you guys. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.